Blood trickled down Marcus Wilson's face as he stared at the police badge on the floor. The corrupt officer hadn't expected a black liquor store owner to fight back. Now, with 4 armed cops surrounding him, Marcus smiled. They didn't know they'd just threatened a retired Delta Force commander. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe in justice, and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers. Now let's see how an ordinary business owner turned the tables on a system designed to break him. Marcus Wilson stood behind the polished oak counter of Cornerstone Spirits, meticulously arranging a display of top-shelf bourbon. At 45, his closely cropped salt and pepper hair and athletic build gave him a distinguished appearance that commanded respect without demanding it. 20 years of Delta Force operations in the world's most dangerous combat zones had trained him to appear ordinary while remaining extraordinary. He'd chosen this neighborhood in Chicago's Westbridge district deliberately after retiring from military service. While others saw urban decay, Marcus recognized a community with potential that simply needed investment and stability. The morning light streamed through the front windows, catching dust particles in golden beams as he prepared for another day of business. He'd established a routine since opening 2 years ago: arrive at 5:30, inventory stock clean thoroughly, and open precisely at 7. His military precision translated perfectly to business operations. The bell above the door chimed as Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins, a 76-year-old widow from the apartment building next door, entered for her weekly purchase of cooking sherry. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson." She called, her voice warm with familiarity. "Beautiful day we're having." Marcus emerged from behind the counter, already reaching for her usual brand on the second shelf. "Morning, Mrs. Jenkins. Let me help you with that grocery bag." He gently took the heavy bag from her weathered hands. The weight would have been nothing to him, even without his military training, but for her it had become a burden. "You know I keep telling you to call me Eleanor," she chided with a smile. "Mr. Wilson makes me feel ancient." Marcus returned her smile as he rang up the sherry. "And my mother would haunt me if I didn't show proper respect to my elders." This was their weekly exchange, comfortable and predictable. As she left, Dion Williams, a 17-year-old from the neighborhood high school, entered hesitantly. The teenager had been caught shoplifting from Cornerstone 6 months ago. Rather than calling the police, Marcus had offered him a job stocking shelves after school. "Morning, Mr. Wilson," Dion said, immediately moving to the storeroom to begin his morning tasks. Marcus nodded, watching the transformation that had occurred in the young man. From sullen and defensive to responsible and increasingly confident, these were the victories that mattered to Marcus now. Not the high-value targets eliminated in distant deserts, but the potential salvaged in his own community. The calm morning shattered at 9:23 when 4 police officers entered Cornerstone Spirits. Marcus noted their tactical formation immediately. Not the casual entrance of public servants, but the practiced movement of predators. The leader, a stocky white man with a crew cut and cold blue eyes, approached the counter while the others spread out through the store. His nameplate read, "Officer Keller." "License and registration," he demanded without preamble. Marcus reached slowly beneath the counter, noting how the officer's hands drifted toward their weapons. He produced his business license and liquor permit, all properly displayed in frames behind the counter as well. Officer Keller made a show of examining them, his eyes revealing he had no interest in their legitimacy. "Pretty fancy place for this neighborhood," he remarked, glancing around at the well-organized shelves and clean floors. "Must be doing well for yourself." The implied question about finances hung in the air. A second officer, taller, with a ruddy complexion and nameplate reading, Walsh, picked up an expensive bottle of scotch, high-end inventory too. Surprising clientele in this area can afford this. Marcus maintained a neutral expression, though he'd already categorized each officer by threat level, identified available improvised weapons within reach, and calculated 3 different exit strategies. Old habits from combat zones died hard. "I serve a diverse customer base," he replied evenly. "Is there something specific I can help you gentlemen with today?" A third officer, Dunham, according to his uniform, was younger than the others. He examined a display of local craft spirits that Marcus had started carrying to support small businesses. The fourth Morris, a heavy-set man with a permanent scowl, stationed himself near the door. Officer Keller leaned across the counter close enough that Marcus could smell stale coffee on his breath. This neighborhood has been experiencing some problems lately. Break-ins, vandalism. We're increasing our presence to protect local businesses. The threat was unmistakable beneath the thin veneer of community service. We have a special community protection program, Keller continued. Businesses that participate get extra patrols priority response. Marcus had encountered similar protection rackets during deployments in Afghanistan and Syria. Corrupt local officials demanding payment from businesses promising safety that was really just safety from themselves. I appreciate your concern, officers, Marcus replied with calculated professionalism, but my security system is comprehensive. I've had no issues. Officer Walsh snorted, setting down the scotch bottle carelessly. Systems fail. Response times in this neighborhood are unpredictable. Officer Keller straightened up, adjusting his belt. Think about it. We'll stop by again to discuss the details. Program's been very effective for businesses that participate. As they turned to leave, Officer Morris deliberately knocked over a display of wine bottles with his elbow. Glass shattered across the polished floor. Oops, he said flatly. Accidents happen, especially in high-crime areas. They left without another word. Marcus began cleaning up the mess, his movements efficient, despite the anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. Mrs. Jenkins had lingered by the greeting cards during the encounter. Now she approached cautiously. They've been hitting all the black-owned businesses, she whispered, looking nervously toward the door. The Henderson family had to close their restaurant last month after their kitchen got vandalized 3 times. Police reports went nowhere. Marcus nodded carefully, sweeping glass shards. Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Jenkins. After she left, Marcus locked the door and went to the back office. From a hidden compartment in his desk, he removed a small case containing specialized surveillance equipment from his military days. He'd maintained connections with former teammates who now worked in private security. By closing time, he had installed 6 hidden cameras throughout the store, their feeds directed to an encrypted server. His years in military intelligence had taught him to recognize patterns of corruption. What he'd witnessed today wasn't random harassment, but a systematic operation. As he armed the security system that night, Marcus reflected on the irony. He'd left behind the world of combat and covert operations seeking peace. Instead, it seemed war had found him again. This time, however, the battlefield was his own community, and the enemies wore badges instead of carrying foreign flags. He wasn't a soldier anymore, just a businessman. But as he looked at the security monitors, showing his quiet, empty store, Marcus knew some skills never left you. He just hoped he wouldn't need to use them. 7 days passed with no sign of Officer Keller and his squad. Marcus maintained his routine but with heightened awareness. He noted patrol cars driving slowly past Cornerstone Spirits officers inside, watching the storefront with predatory interest. Each night he reviewed security footage, noting patterns in police movements through the neighborhood. He'd already identified which black-owned businesses received frequent visits and which had closed recently. The tactical analysis was second nature after years of intelligence work. On Friday evening, just before closing at 10, the bell above the door announced their return. This time, they didn't pretend to be on official business. Officer Keller entered first, followed by Walsh, Dunham, and Morris in the same tactical formation. The store was empty of customers. Marcus stood behind the counter, watching their approach with the stillness that had served him well in ambush situations. Thought about our conversation, Keller asked, removing his gloves deliberately. Your neighborhood tax is due. Marcus kept his expression neutral. I don't recall any tax being mentioned. Officer Walsh laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Community Protection Program. $500 a week keeps your windows intact and your merchandise safe. From whom Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. From accidents, Officer Morris replied, pulling a bottle from a shelf and examining it. Lot of accidents happened to unprotected businesses. Officer Keller leaned against the counter. We checked you out, Wilson. 20 years Army, honorable discharge, combat veteran. His tone dismissed these accomplishments. Army boy thinks he's special, thinks his service means something here. Marcus remained silent, calculating odds and outcomes. 4 armed opponents in confined space. Civilians potentially entering at any moment. Multiple security cameras recording. Officer Walsh moved closer. 500. Cash. Consider it your first payment. Rate might go up next month depending on neighborhood conditions. I don't pay protection money, Marcus stated flatly. You should leave now. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Officer Keller's false civility vanished. Wrong answer. With practiced coordination, they began methodically destroying the store. Officer Morris swept an entire shelf of premium spirits onto the floor, while Walsh upended a display of wine. Officer Dunham spray-painted the wall behind the counter, "Know your place." Officer Keller kept his eyes on Marcus' hand, resting on his holstered weapon. "This is just a taste. Next time will be worse." Marcus stood motionless, but internally he was making threat assessments, identifying weaknesses. Officer Keller right-handed favors, left knee likely old injury. Officer Walsh overconfident, sloppy positioning. Officer Morris physically strongest but slowest. Officer Dunham youngest, hesitant, following rather than leading. Years of combat training created these instant analyses. 22 confirmed kills during his service. Hundreds of high-risk operations. Expert in hand-to-hand combat, tactical weapons, and psychological warfare. But he wasn't that person anymore. He'd left that life behind. Officer Dunham finished his vandalism and approached the counter, extending a police baton with a metallic click. Boss said to leave a more personal reminder. The young officer swung the baton toward Marcus's face. 2 decades of combat instinct took over. Marcus moved with fluid precision, catching Dunham's wrist, twisting sharply, and disarming him in a single motion. The baton clattered to the floor as Dunham gasped in pain. Before anyone could react, Marcus had released him and stepped back behind the counter. The movement had taken less than 2 seconds. Stunned silence followed. Then 3 weapons appeared, pointed at Marcus's chest. "On your knees, hands where I can see them," Keller shouted, rage contorting his features. Marcus slowly raised his hands, knowing escalation now would only end badly. Officer Keller's breathing was heavy, his control slipping. "You just assaulted an officer. That's a serious offense." His gun remained aimed at Marcus's chest. "Could be dangerous. Might have to use necessary force to subdue you." Marcus recognized the threat for what it was, an execution setup. "Your body cameras seem to be off," he observed calmly. "And my cameras are recording everything." This wasn't entirely true. The cameras were hidden and the officers hadn't noticed them. But the statement had the desired effect. Officer Keller hesitated. "Next time we won't be discussing payment," he said finally, "and there won't be any cameras to save you." Officer Dunham still cradled his wrist, his expression a mixture of pain and shock at how easily he'd been neutralized. They backed out of the store, weapons still drawn. "Clean this mess up," Officer Morris called as they left. "We'll be back to inspect the property soon." After they departed, Marcus immediately called 911 to report the vandalism. The responding officers arrived 40 minutes later. They were clearly friends of Keller's team. One even had the same division patch. They took minimal notes, suggested it was probably local gangs, and implied Marcus should consider selling and moving to a better neighborhood. When Marcus mentioned the officers involved by name, the responding officer closed his notebook. Serious accusations against respected officers need serious evidence. Got any? Marcus considered his hidden camera footage but recognized revealing it now would only escalate the situation without resolution. "These officers weren't here to help, just asking questions," he replied calmly. After they left, Marcus assessed the damage, approximately $10,000 in destroyed inventory plus property damage. He methodically cleaned broken glass, mopped spilled liquor, and documented everything for insurance, though he doubted any claim involving police would be processed. In the bathroom, he examined the cut above his eyebrow where flying glass had struck him. Using a military field kit from his office, he efficiently cleaned and closed the wound. No hospital visit that would generate questions and reports. No official record of injury. Once the store was secured, Marcus entered a code into his security system that would trigger an alert if anyone attempted entry. In his office, he opened a concealed safe embedded in the floor. Inside lay his military documentation medals he never displayed, and a secure satellite phone that couldn't be traced through conventional means. He hadn't used it since retirement. He didn't call anyone yet, but having it charged and ready was a contingency he couldn't ignore. As he finally drove home at 3 in the morning, Marcus knew the rules of engagement had changed. He'd tried to build a peaceful life to leave violence behind. But these men had brought war to his doorstep, assuming he was an easy target because of his race and profession. They'd made a critical error in threat assessment. Delta Force operators were trained to appear ordinary while being anything but. Marcus hadn't sought this conflict. But as he'd learned through multiple combat deployments, once battle is joined, you either win decisively or you don't survive. The next morning, Marcus initiated what military operations would classify as reconnaissance. He closed the store for renovations following the vandalism incident, giving himself freedom of movement. His first call was to Darius Johnson, a childhood friend who'd become a paralegal at a civil rights law firm. They met at a coffee shop 10 blocks from Cornerstone Spirits. Darius looked older than his 43 years, the stress of fighting unwinnable cases etched into the lines around his eyes. "Man, I've been hearing about this happening, but they usually target smaller places without resources," Darius said after Marcus described the encounter. "You're talking about Officer Richard Keller. The man's got a file of complaints thicker than a phone book, but nothing sticks. Department protects him." Marcus sipped his coffee, observing other patrons with habitual vigilance. What about the others? Walsh, Dunham, Morris, Darius opened his laptop discreetly. Walsh has 3 excessive force complaints, all against black suspects, all dismissed. Dunham's new less than 2 years on the force. Morris transferred from another precinct after some undisclosed incident there. Chain of command, Marcus asked, thinking in military terms. Lieutenant Michael Pierce runs that district. Word is he's tight with the mayor's office untouchable. Look, Marcus, I know that look. This isn't like overseas. You can't just... Marcus cut him off with a subtle hand gesture. I'm gathering information, that's all. Who else has been hit? Over the next 3 days, Marcus visited other black-owned businesses in the neighborhood. Most owners were reluctant to talk, fear evident in averted eyes and quick dismissals. But James Anderson, who owned Supreme Cuts Barbershop, recognized Marcus as a regular customer and opened up after closing hours. Started about 3 years ago, James explained, sweeping hair from the floor with methodical strokes. Small at first, parking tickets whenever police cars were around. Then health inspections every month. Building code violations for things that had been fine for years. He leaned on his broom. Then they get direct. Protection money. $500 a month at first. Now I'm paying $1,500. You pay? Marcus asked without judgment. James looked at him directly. Got a family. Can't fight the police and feed my kids at the same time. Similar conversations with Letitia Reynolds, owner of Sweet Dreams Bakery, revealed the same pattern. They target us specifically, she whispered, constantly checking the door of her empty bakery. White-owned businesses on the same block never get these visits. Through careful questioning and observation, Marcus built a comprehensive intelligence picture. The operation targeted only black-owned businesses. It had grown systematically over 3 years. 8 businesses had already closed after owners couldn't afford the escalating demands. The corruption extended beyond the 4 officers to Lieutenant Pierce, who managed the distribution of funds and provided protection from internal affairs investigations. What do you think about this situation? Is this just a few bad officers, or does it represent something more systemic? Comment number 1. If you believe corrupt officers should face harsher penalties than civilians because they betray public trust, like and subscribe if you want to see justice served in this story. How far would you go to protect your business and community if the very people sworn to protect you become the predators? Let's continue and find out what Marcus does next. Using his Delta Force surveillance training, Marcus followed Officer Walsh after a shift change. The officer drove to an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district, where 6 other police vehicles were already parked. From a concealed position across the street, Marcus photographed every license plate and officer entering the building. Inside his car, Equipped with a military-grade directional microphone, he recorded fragments of conversation about collection totals and distribution schedules. Pierce arrived last in an expensive Audi wearing civilian clothes rather than uniform. The meeting lasted 42 minutes. Marcus documented everything with the meticulous attention to detail that had kept him alive in hostile territory. Back at Cornerstone Spirits, Marcus noticed police cruisers driving by every few hours. Officer Keller made a point of slowing down, making eye contact through the papered windows where renovating reopening soon signs covered the damage within. That evening, Marcus attended a community meeting at Greater Hope Baptist Church. He sat in the back, anonymous, listening as residents voiced concerns about increasing police harassment. Pastor Wallace moderated, trying to maintain positivity, despite the hopelessness permeating the room. "We filed complaints," an elderly woman said. "Written letters to the mayor. Nothing changes. My nephew got arrested for standing outside his own apartment building," another voice added. Said he matched a description. No description was ever given. Marcus absorbed every detail, recognizing the systematic nature of the oppression. This wasn't random harassment, but calculated intimidation designed to extract resources from an already vulnerable community. Through whispered conversations after the meeting, Marcus learned that the corruption extended through multiple levels of local government. Building inspectors were bribed to find violations. Health department officials targeted black-owned restaurants with excessive inspections. The mayor's office buried complaints in bureaucratic procedures. A conventional approach through legal channels would fail against this entrenched system. As Marcus drove home that night, he formulated a new tactical assessment. This wasn't a situation that could be resolved through traditional means. The system itself was compromised. In military operations, when conventional approaches failed, Delta Force utilized asymmetric warfare, leveraging unexpected strengths against an enemy's critical weaknesses. For the first time since returning to civilian life, Marcus began thinking like a Delta operator again. The target wasn't just 4 corrupt officers. It was an entire system that enabled and protected them. The mission parameters were clear: dismantle the corrupt network, secure justice for the community, and ensure the operation couldn't be rebuilt. Marcus would need resources, intelligence, and allies. Most importantly, he would need to employ the psychological warfare techniques that had made Delta Force so effective against seemingly stronger opponents. As he parked outside his modest apartment, Marcus noticed a police cruiser slowly passing by. They were watching his home as well as his business. The surveillance meant they considered him a threat. Good. In combat, when the enemy begins watching you, it means they fear what you might do. Fear makes people predictable. Predictability creates vulnerability. And Marcus Wilson had spent 20 years learning how to exploit vulnerability. The war had officially begun. 1 week after the vandalism incident, Cornerstone Spirits reopened with reinforced security gates, shatterproof display cases, and cameras visibly mounted in each corner. The visible security measures were merely a distraction from the sophisticated surveillance system now hidden throughout the store. In the back office, Marcus had established what Delta operators called a TOC, Tactical Operations Center. Multiple monitors displayed camera feeds, police radio frequencies, and building approaches. The renovations had included a concealed room accessible through a hidden panel in the storage area containing communications equipment and a small arsenal, all legally owned through his firearms license. The morning of reopening, Marcus made a call on his secure satellite phone. "Riley, it's Wilson. Remember that favor you owe me from Kandahar?" Riley Thompson had served alongside Marcus in Delta Force for 15 years. Now he ran a private security consulting firm with resources and connections spanning military and civilian sectors. Damn, Marcus. Been what, 3 years? Must be serious if you're calling it in. Marcus explained the situation concisely using the shorthand they'd developed through dozens of operations. Riley whistled low. "Corrupt cops targeting black businesses. Man, I thought you left the war zones." "Apparently they followed me home," Marcus replied. "Need your expertise on financial tracking and electronic surveillance, plus an insurance policy." Riley didn't hesitate. "I'll be there tomorrow." And Marcus Pack, extra magazines. Cops fight dirty when cornered. The bell above the door announced the first customers of the reopened store. Business resumed with an appearance of normalcy, though Marcus now wore a concealed Kevlar vest beneath his button-down shirt. At precisely 6:17 that evening, the expected visitors arrived. Officer Keller entered first, followed by his three-man team. Their body language radiated confidence and menace. "Place looks better than before," Officer Keller remarked, glancing at the visible security cameras without concern. "Must have cost a fortune to fix up after that unfortunate vandalism." Marcus maintained his professional demeanor. "What can I help you with, officers?" Officer Walsh smirked. "Protection payment? Double rate now for the inconvenience you caused us last time." Marcus reached beneath the counter, slowly noting how their hands moved toward weapons. He produced an envelope containing $500 in marked bills, each one photographed and recorded by serial number beforehand. "This is all I can afford," he said, his voice convincingly defeated. "Business hasn't recovered from the closure." Officer Keller took the envelope, counting its contents with practiced efficiency. "It's a start. We'll be back next week for the rest. Any more resistance and renovation won't fix what happens next." They left without further incident, unaware that Riley Thompson was photographing them from a parked car across the street, documenting the exchange of money. Over the next 3 days, Riley tracked the financial trail. The protection money flowed through a complex network of offshore accounts, eventually returning to real estate investments throughout the city. All properties connected to shell companies linked to Lieutenant Pierce and several city officials. "Classic laundering operation," Riley explained, showing Marcus the financial diagrams. "They've been running this for years. Conservative estimate puts their take at $3 to $4 million annually, from businesses across 3 districts." Marcus nodded, absorbing the intelligence. Weakness: Pierce is careful with digital footprints, but Officers Keller and Walsh are sloppy. Their phones have minimal security. And Officer Dunham, Riley pulled up surveillance photos. He's unhappy. Drinks heavily after shifts, argues with Keller frequently. Marcus recognized the vulnerability immediately. The reluctant participant. Pressure point. The next phase began with anonymous tips to local media outlets about police corruption in the district. Nothing specific enough to trigger immediate investigation, but sufficient to create atmospheric pressure. Meanwhile, Riley installed specialized tracking software on the officers' vehicles during their regular patrol routes. Marcus began psychological operations, subtle actions designed to unnerve the corrupt officers without providing actionable evidence against himself. Officer Keller found his police radio malfunctioning during critical calls. Officer Walsh discovered his tires mysteriously deflated after leaving a bar. Small, deniable incidents that gradually increased their stress levels. Lieutenant Pierce responded predictably. Health inspectors arrived at Cornerstone Spirits, finding critical violations that hadn't existed during previous inspections. Building code enforcement issued citations for infractions that had been approved in the original permitting. The pressure campaign escalated when police executed a raid on the store, claiming an anonymous tip about narcotics. They planted evidence, small bags of cocaine hidden behind inventory. But Marcus had anticipated this tactic. Hidden cameras recorded Officer Morris placing the drugs while other officers conducted the search. The footage was immediately uploaded to secure servers beyond police reach. The raid resulted in Marcus being handcuffed and the store being thoroughly vandalized under the guise of a search. Inventory was destroyed, displays shattered, and racist graffiti spray-painted in areas not visible from outside. Marcus remained silent throughout, observing which officers seemed uncomfortable with the excessive destruction. Officer Dunham's discomfort was evident in his body language and minimal participation. When released without charges 12 hours later due to inconclusive evidence, Marcus returned to find community members already cleaning his store. Mrs. Jenkins had organized neighbors to help. James from the barber shop brought replacement inventory from his own supplies. Letitia provided food for the volunteers. "They did the same to my cousin's place last year," a young volunteer explained as he swept up broken glass. He gave up, moved to Atlanta. "We're tired of losing good businesses." The community support was unexpected but welcome. It provided perfect cover for Marcus's next move, identifying Officer Dunham as the weak link in the corrupt operation. Through careful observation and Riley's surveillance, Marcus determined that Dunham frequented a specific bar on Thursday nights, often drinking alone after arguments with Officer Keller. The young officer was clearly troubled by the escalating tactics against Marcus and other business owners. That vulnerability made him the perfect target for turning. As the community rallied around Cornerstone spirits, Marcus activated his full Delta Force network. Former teammates with specialized skills arrived in pairs, establishing surveillance on Lieutenant Pierce, monitoring police communications, and creating secure channels for evidence gathering. The operation was transitioning from reconnaissance to active countermeasures. Lieutenant Pierce and his corrupt officers had targeted Marcus Wilson, believing he was just another black business owner they could intimidate and exploit. They hadn't recognized they were actually engaging with a highly trained Delta Force operator with extensive experience dismantling enemy networks. They'd brought conventional weapons to an asymmetric warfare scenario. And in asymmetric warfare, superior force often becomes a liability rather than an advantage. Thursday evening arrived with a steady rain that emptied the streets and provided perfect cover for covert operations. Marcus entered the Rusty Nail Bar at 9:45, precisely 17 minutes after Officer Dunham had taken his usual corner table. The young officer was already on his second whiskey, staring into the amber liquid, as if it might provide answers to whatever troubled his conscience. Marcus approached casually, nothing in his demeanor, suggesting threat or confrontation. "Mind if I join you?" he asked already, sliding into the opposite chair. Dunham's head snapped up, recognition and alarm flashing across his features. His hand instinctively moved toward his concealed weapon. "I'm not here for trouble," Marcus said quietly. "Just conversation." The officer's eyes darted toward the door, calculating escape routes. "Nothing to talk about," he muttered, but made no move to leave. "I think there is," Marcus replied, placing a manila envelope on the table between them, "particularly about what happened during the raid on my store." Dunham's face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." Marcus opened the envelope and removed a single photograph. It showed Officer Morris planting evidence while Dunham watched, his expression clearly showing discomfort. "That's not the only one," Marcus said. "I have the complete sequence. Your body camera was conveniently off, but mine weren't." The young officer's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his drink. "What do you want?" he asked hoarsely. "Information," Marcus answered. "I was Delta Force for 20 years. Ran operations against terrorist networks, warlords, drug cartels. Recognizing patterns is what kept me alive." He leaned forward slightly. "And I recognize someone following orders they don't believe in." For the next hour, Marcus employed the psychological techniques he'd used to turn informants in combat zones. He identified Dunham's moral discomfort, offered understanding rather than judgment, and presented a path to redemption. The approach was calculated but genuine. Marcus had seen enough combat to recognize the difference between evil men and those caught in corrupt systems. By the third drink, Dunham's resistance crumbled. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he confessed, voice barely above a whisper. "I became a cop to help people. Then Pierce brings me into his special unit, says it's community management, just collecting fees from businesses that can afford to support police." He looked up, eyes haunted. "Then I saw what happens to people who don't pay. The information flowed freely after that." Lieutenant Pierce ran a sophisticated racketeering operation targeting minority-owned businesses across multiple districts. The money funded luxury properties, political campaigns, and bribes to regulatory officials. Evidence suggested connections to the mayor's office and possibly a state judge who dismissed complaints against officers. Most importantly, Dunham provided access codes to police scheduling systems and internal communications. "They're planning something big," he warned as they prepared to leave. "Keller was talking about making an example of you." Pierce gave approval for extreme measures. Marcus nodded, having expected escalation. "I need your help documenting everything. In return, I'll ensure you receive immunity when this reaches federal prosecution." Dunham hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The turning of Officer Dunham marked a critical inflection point in the operation. With his cooperation, Marcus and Riley established comprehensive surveillance of the entire corrupt network. Meanwhile, Cornerstone spirits faced increasingly violent attacks, windows shattered by bricks in the night, threatening messages painted on delivery vehicles. The campaign of intimidation reached a new level when Dion Williams, the young employee Marcus had mentored, was beaten by Officer Walsh while delivering supplies to the store. The teenager required hospitalization for 3 broken ribs and a concussion. The assault crossed a line for Marcus. His mission parameters shifted from defensive to offensive strategy. The Delta Force approach to asymmetric warfare emphasized attacking enemy command and control systems rather than engaging in direct confrontation. Using military-grade surveillance equipment provided by Riley Marcus documented all movements, conversations, and financial transactions of the corrupt officers. He identified their property holdings, banking patterns, and personal vulnerabilities. Officer Keller maintained a girlfriend in a luxury apartment, while his wife believed he worked night shifts. Officer Walsh had a gambling problem that required regular payments to a loan shark. Lieutenant Pierce had political ambitions requiring clean public perception. Each vulnerability created potential leverage. As the intelligence gathering intensified, Officer Keller began noticing unusual patterns. His personal vehicle experienced electrical failures. His private phone conversations seemed to be referenced by strangers. The psychological pressure generated increasing paranoia. "Someone's watching us," he complained to Lieutenant Pierce during a meeting Marcus had under surveillance. "Wilson isn't just taking the beatings like the others." Lieutenant Pierce dismissed these concerns initially, but the mounting evidence of counterintelligence operations eventually convinced him to take decisive action. "Burn it down," he ordered during a late-night meeting with his officers. "Make it look like an electrical fire. Insurance fraud if anyone asks questions. I want that store gone and Wilson broken." The arson attempt came at 3:27 in the morning. 2 figures in dark clothing approached Cornerstone Spirits with gasoline canisters. They disabled the visible security cameras but missed the concealed systems. As they prepared to ignite the accelerant, Riley Thompson activated remote-triggered sprinklers that doused the would-be arsonists with indelible UV-reactive dye, invisible in normal light but impossible to wash off and clearly visible under specialized detection equipment. The failed arson marked a turning point in community response. Marcus had been quietly building a network of business owners, sharing security footage of police misconduct and establishing communication protocols. After the arson attempt, this network expanded rapidly. Community members began documenting police activities throughout the neighborhood. Vehicle descriptions, badge numbers, and patrol patterns flowed into Marcus's secure database. James Anderson from the barbershop became an informal intelligence hub, gathering information from customers and relaying it through encrypted channels Riley had established. Letitia Reynolds used her bakery deliveries to transport documentation between businesses without raising suspicion. What had begun as one man's resistance transformed into community-wide counter-surveillance. Officer Keller and his team found themselves being recorded whenever they entered Black-owned businesses. Lieutenant Pierce discovered that his supposedly secret meetings were being observed by multiple witnesses. The corrupt officers realized they were losing control of a situation they had dominated for years. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Marcus Wilson was no longer merely a target of their extortion. He had become the architect of their unraveling. The corrupt system that had operated with impunity now faced an opponent trained in dismantling exactly such networks. As Marcus reviewed the expanding intelligence database in his hidden operations room, Riley Thompson summarized their progress. "We've documented over 70 instances of extortion, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations, connected financial transfers to offshore accounts, identified the entire command structure." Marcus nodded, studying the network diagram displayed on his monitors. "Time to take this beyond local containment. Contact your federal connections." The operation was about to enter its most dangerous phase, direct engagement with the system that protected corrupt officers from accountability. For Marcus Wilson, it was familiar territory. Delta Force specialized in high-risk operations against entrenched enemies. The difference was that this battlefield was his home, and the stakes were not abstract military objectives, but the future of his community. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen arrived in Chicago with a reputation for dismantling police corruption in 3 previous cities. Her no-nonsense approach and impeccable case record made her the perfect contact for Marcus's operation. They met at a federal building downtown away from local police jurisdiction. Marcus and Riley presented their evidence methodically: financial records, surveillance footage, sworn statements from Officer Dunham and affected business owners. Agent Chen reviewed everything with clinical precision. "This is comprehensive," she acknowledged, arranging files with meticulous care. Multiple predicate offenses for RICO charges, civil rights violations, conspiracy, witness intimidation. She looked up at Marcus. "You've built a federal case. Will you pursue it?" Marcus asked directly. Agent Chen's expression remained neutral. "I'll open an official investigation today. But you should understand something, Mr. Wilson. Police corruption cases face unique challenges. The blue wall is real, and it has political foundations." Her warning proved prophetic. Within 48 hours of opening the investigation, Agent Chen encountered systematic obstruction. Evidence submitted to the police department's Internal Affairs Division mysteriously disappeared from secure storage. Interview appointments with potential witnesses were leaked, allowing intimidation before testimony. Lieutenant Pierce's political connections activated immediately. A state senator called the FBI field office, questioning the harassment of dedicated officers based on unsubstantiated claims. The mayor's office issued a statement supporting the police department's exemplary record of community service. The counterattack escalated dramatically when Officer Dunham failed to report for his shift. Marcus received an encrypted message with a location in an industrial area. He found the young officer beaten severely, left in an alley behind abandoned warehouses, multiple broken bones, internal bleeding, and the word "rat" carved into his chest. "They took my phone," Dunham gasped, as Marcus provided emergency first aid. "They know everything I told you." Marcus transported him to a private medical facility rather than a hospital where corrupt officers might find him. Riley established a secure safe house with former military personnel providing protection. Meanwhile, the community faced increased police presence and systematic intimidation. Officers conducted random searches of customers entering black-owned businesses. Health inspectors appeared daily at establishments connected to Marcus's network. James Anderson received 15 citations in a single week. Letitia Reynolds had her business license temporarily suspended for administrative review. Media coverage began with balanced reporting of corruption allegations, but quickly shifted. Local news stations ran profiles of the accused officers, highlighting their service records and family lives. Stories about unsubstantiated accusations, damaging police morale, dominated coverage. When Marcus attempted to provide evidence to journalists, he discovered media ownership connections to the same political network, protecting Lieutenant Pierce. The system's full counteroffensive came when Pierce filed formal charges against Marcus: assault on a police officer, drug distribution, resisting arrest, intimidation of witnesses. Each charge carefully constructed with planted evidence and falsified reports. The arrest warrant was issued on a Friday afternoon, timed to ensure Marcus would spend the weekend in jail before any hearing. Marcus had anticipated this move and had already implemented countermeasures. When officers arrived at Cornerstone Spirits with the warrant, the store was empty. Security cameras recorded their systematic destruction of property and planting of additional evidence. Marcus had gone underground, utilizing safe houses established through his Delta Force network. Do you believe Marcus is making the right choice by going underground rather than facing the corrupt system directly? Comment number 1, if you think his military training gives him an advantage in this fight, or number 2, if you think he should trust the legal system despite its flaws. Like and subscribe to see how deep this corruption goes, and whether one man can truly stand against an entire system designed to protect its own. What would you do if you found yourself targeted by the very people sworn to uphold the law? From a concealed location, Marcus maintained operational control through encrypted communications. Riley coordinated their expanding network while Agent Chen continued building the federal case despite increasing pressure from above. "My supervisor's getting calls from Washington," she reported during a secure call. "Someone's pulling serious strings to shut this down." The campaign against Marcus intensified. Police raided his apartment, planting drugs and weapons. His bank accounts were frozen for investigation of financial crimes. Lieutenant Pierce held a press conference portraying Marcus as a dangerous criminal using military training to wage war against law enforcement. "This individual presents a unique threat," Pierce told reporters with practiced concern. "His combat training makes him unpredictable and potentially violent. We urge the public to report any sightings but not to approach." The portrayal of Marcus as a dangerous fugitive created division within the community. Some believed the police narrative, while others recognized the systematic destruction of a respected business owner. Pastor Wallace attempted to mediate, organizing a community forum to discuss police relations. The event was heavily monitored by officers taking photographs of attendees. 4 days into his underground operation, Marcus executed a plan to access police communication systems. Using Riley's expertise and specialized equipment, they established a tap into the encrypted channels used by Lieutenant Pierce's unit. The intercepted communications revealed the true extent of the corruption. "We need Wilson eliminated before he can testify," Lieutenant Pierce's voice stated clearly during one exchange. "Make it look like he resisted arrest. The usual procedure." Officer Keller responded, "What about the others? Anderson keeps filing complaints." "Make examples of the loudest ones," Pierce ordered. "Property damage first. If that doesn't work, we have other options. Focus on the black businesses supporting Wilson. Break them, and his support network collapses." Marcus recorded everything, adding it to the growing evidence package for Agent Chen. The operation reached a critical juncture when an anonymous whistleblower from within the police department contacted Agent Chen directly. The source provided internal documents showing systematic targeting of black-owned businesses, including lists of tax collection routes and distribution percentages to various officials. Marcus recognized the opportunity to expand the operation beyond defensive measures. Using secure channels, he coordinated with James Anderson, Letitia Reynolds, and other business owners to simultaneously release evidence to multiple media outlets. Security footage showing officers collecting protection money. Audio recordings of threats, before and after photographs of businesses that had been vandalized after refusing payment. The coordinated information release overwhelmed the system's ability to contain the narrative. National media picked up the story, framing it as systematic racial targeting rather than isolated corruption. Social media amplified the evidence, creating public pressure that transcended local control. Officer Walsh panicked under the mounting scrutiny. He attempted to flee the city with a duffel bag containing $67,000 in cash. Marcus had anticipated the reaction and intercepted him at a bus terminal. The confrontation was brief and nonviolent. Walsh surrendered when faced with a man he knew could easily overpower him. The financial records in Walsh's possession provided direct evidence linking to Lieutenant Pierce's offshore accounts. Marcus delivered both Walsh and the evidence to Agent Chen rather than seeking personal vengeance. City officials attempted damage control, promising a thorough investigation while privately working to obstruct it. The mayor announced an independent review panel comprised of individuals with direct ties to the same power structure protecting Pierce. Agent Chen found herself facing career-threatening pressure from political appointees in the Justice Department. "They're offering me a promotion to drop this case," she told Marcus during a secure meeting. "When bribes don't work, they'll move to threats." Marcus nodded, understanding the tactical situation. "They're centralizing their defense, becoming predictable." Lieutenant Pierce realized the extent of the exposure and moved to direct action. Surveillance identified Marcus's sister's residence as a potential location where he might seek shelter. Pierce personally organized an operation to ambush Marcus there, deploying 8 officers with orders to use maximum force to subdue a dangerous suspect. What Pierce failed to understand was that he was now operating in Marcus's domain, asymmetric warfare, where the numerically superior force becomes vulnerable through its own aggression. Marcus had anticipated the ambush and prepared accordingly. He wasn't at his sister's home. She had been moved to a secure location days earlier. Instead, Pierce's team found themselves under surveillance from multiple positions. Every movement, every communication recorded and transmitted to federal authorities. When Officer Keller broke down the front door, he triggered non-lethal countermeasures, military-grade flashbang devices and smoke dispensers that disoriented the entry team. In the confusion, 3 officers accidentally discharged weapons, creating a record of unauthorized force. Marcus observed from a concealed position as the operation collapsed into chaos. Lieutenant Pierce screamed contradictory orders, while officers blundered through smoke-filled rooms, finding nothing but recording devices capturing their illegal search. The failed raid became a tactical turning point. Officer Keller suffered a broken arm in the confusion, not from any action by Marcus, but from a panicked collision with another officer. The injury required hospital treatment, creating official medical records contradicting the planned narrative of a confrontation with the fugitive. As media coverage of the corruption evidence expanded, public perception shifted dramatically. Marcus's military record was leaked to journalists, his Bronze Star's Purple Heart, and commendations for saving civilian lives during complex operations. The contrast between his service record and the department's portrayal of him as a dangerous criminal undermined police credibility. Community members began openly displaying support for the targeted businesses. Crowds formed protective presences outside James Anderson's barbershop and Letitia Reynolds' bakery when police vehicles approached. What had begun as one man's resistance had transformed into a community-wide movement against systematic corruption and racial targeting. The battlefield had expanded beyond what Lieutenant Pierce and his corrupt officers could control. They had brought conventional weapons to an asymmetric conflict, and Marcus Wilson had spent 20 years mastering that particular form of warfare. Marcus Wilson recognized that the moment had arrived for decisive action. Isolated exposures of corruption had created pressure, but the system was designed to contain and weather isolated scandals. A coordinated, overwhelming release of evidence would be necessary to create the systemic collapse required for true reform. From his hidden command center, Marcus coordinated with Riley Thompson to execute the most ambitious phase of the operation. Using specialized equipment and Riley's expertise in cybersecurity, they established temporary access to police communication systems across the district. For 6 hours, every communication, every dispatch, every tactical decision was recorded and cataloged. The access revealed the true scope of the corruption network. Officers explicitly discussed racial targeting, focus on the black businesses. They're less likely to have connections to fight back. Lieutenant Pierce coordinated resource allocation based on extraction potential rather than public safety. Ignore the domestic calls in Sector 4. Concentrate on the commercial strip where the money is. Most damaging were conversations about evidence manipulation and targeted harassment of business owners who resisted payment. As this electronic intelligence gathering continued, Marcus activated the network of community informants he had carefully cultivated. Anonymous whistleblowers from within the police department, emboldened by the growing public scrutiny, began providing internal documents. A clerk in records management delivered 5 years of complaint filings against the officers involved, all mysteriously dismissed without investigation. A dispatcher provided logs showing delayed response times to emergencies in predominantly black neighborhoods compared to white areas with similar incident types. Marcus organized the evidence into comprehensive packages tailored for different media outlets. Local television received video footage of officers collecting protection money. National print media received financial records showing the money trail to offshore accounts. Online journalists received testimony from affected business owners. Social media channels received before and after documentation of thriving businesses destroyed after refusing to pay. The simultaneous release overwhelmed the system's ability to contain the narrative. No single official could address the multifaceted exposure occurring across different platforms. The strategy reflected Marcus's Delta Force training in psychological operations, overwhelming an opponent's decision-making capacity by presenting multiple crises simultaneously. Officer Walsh had already been taken into custody after his failed escape attempt. Officer Morris, seeing the inevitable collapse, attempted to negotiate immunity in exchange for testimony against Lieutenant Pierce. The coordination structure of the corrupt operation began disintegrating as individual self-preservation instincts overrode loyalty. The most damaging evidence came from Marcus's store cameras during the raid. The footage clearly showed Officer Morris planting evidence while Lieutenant Pierce supervised. The unedited video contradicted every official report filed about the incident. When this footage aired on 3 different news channels simultaneously, public outrage reached a tipping point. City officials attempted desperate damage control. The mayor held a press conference promising a thorough investigation while privately working to obstruct federal intervention. Internal Affairs announced a review that would be conducted by officers with direct ties to Lieutenant Pierce. These transparent attempts at containment only heightened public skepticism. Marcus recognized that the exposure phase was generating results, but had not yet reached the command level of the corrupt network. Lieutenant Pierce remained protected by political connections that extended beyond local government. To address this, Marcus implemented the final phase of his information operation. Financial records obtained through Riley's investigation revealed property holdings connected to Pierce through shell companies. These properties included luxury condominiums, vacation homes, and commercial real estate, all far beyond the means of a police lieutenant's salary. Marcus provided this financial evidence to Agent Chen, who used it to secure federal warrants for financial crimes investigations. The pressure on Lieutenant Pierce intensified as his assets were frozen pending investigation. Simultaneously, Marcus released recordings of Pierce explicitly ordering racial targeting, "Focus on the black businesses. They don't have the resources to fight back, and nobody believes them anyway." The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Protests formed outside police headquarters. Community organizations demanded federal oversight. State legislators called for independent investigation. As his protection network crumbled, Lieutenant Pierce realized the extent of his exposure and made a critical error in judgment. Rather than accepting the inevitable legal consequences, he decided to eliminate the primary threat, Marcus Wilson. Pierce gathered his remaining loyal officers for a direct assault on Cornerstone Spirits, where intelligence suggested Marcus had returned. "We end this tonight," Pierce told the assembled officers. "Wilson has threatened officer safety and public order. Maximum force is authorized." What Pierce failed to understand was that Marcus had anticipated this reaction and prepared accordingly. Every approach to the store was under surveillance. Every officer's communication was monitored. Every tactical decision was being recorded for later evidence. Most importantly, Marcus had positioned community observers at strategic locations around the store. Ordinary citizens with cell phones documenting police movements. When Lieutenant Pierce and 7 officers surrounded Cornerstone Spirits at 11:30 that night, they believed they were executing a surprise operation. In reality, they were walking into a carefully orchestrated exposure scenario. They cut power to the building unaware that Marcus had installed redundant systems. They jammed communications, not realizing he had military-grade alternatives in place. They prepared to create a shootout with a dangerous suspect narrative, unaware that dozens of civilian witnesses were already documenting their every move. Marcus activated his countermeasures not with violence but with psychological warfare. Using specialized equipment, he hijacked their radio frequencies, broadcasting their own communications back to them. "Be advised, Lieutenant Pierce has ordered evidence planting at the Wilson location. All officers will deny knowledge if questioned." The disembodied voice created immediate confusion in the police ranks. Officers began questioning each other, suspecting informants in their midst. Marcus continued the psychological operation, using information gathered during surveillance to create division. Officer Ramirez Pierce, plans to blame the excessive force on you if this goes wrong. Though no Officer Ramirez was present, the statement created immediate paranoia. Marcus systematically isolated individual officers, psychologically using their own insecurities and fears against them. As the operation descended into confusion, Lieutenant Pierce became increasingly desperate. When Letitia Reynolds accidentally encountered the police position while walking home from her bakery, Pierce made a fatal error in judgment. He grabbed her as a hostage, creating a standoff situation that was now being recorded by multiple witnesses. "I want Wilson out here now," Pierce shouted, his weapon pressed against Letitia's head. "Or I'll show everyone what happens to people who support him." The situation had deteriorated into a crisis that revealed Pierce's true character to the officers following him. 3 immediately backed away, unwilling to participate in threatening an innocent civilian. Marcus observed from a concealed position, calculating response options. His Delta Force training had prepared him for hostage scenarios in far more complex environments than this. Through building-mounted speakers, Marcus addressed the situation calmly. "Lieutenant Pierce, you're currently being recorded by 17 different cameras. Federal agents have been notified. Release Miss Place. Release Miss Place. Reynolds, and surrender your weapon." Pierce's response was increasingly unhinged. "You think I'm going down alone? I've got protection all the way to the mayor's office. They authorized everything we did." His inadvertent confession was being broadcast live, as community members streamed the encounter to social media. Marcus created a momentary distraction by activating emergency lights on a vehicle down the street. In the split second that Pierce's attention diverted, Marcus moved with the speed and precision that had made him a legendary Delta operator. Before anyone could register his movement, he had crossed the open space, disarmed Pierce with a technique that left the lieutenant's wrist fractured and secured Letitia's safety. The entire tactical response had taken less than 3 seconds. The remaining officers, witnessing the speed and precision of the intervention, immediately surrendered their weapons. Marcus had subdued Pierce without firing a shot or causing permanent injury, a display of restraint that contradicted everything the corrupt system had claimed about him being a dangerous threat. As Pierce lay handcuffed on the ground, Marcus faced a moment of decision. 20 years of combat had taught him efficient ways to eliminate threats permanently. The man who had orchestrated racial targeting, destroyed businesses, and threatened innocent lives was completely vulnerable. For a brief moment, the Delta Force operator calculated the most efficient elimination approach. But Marcus Wilson had returned from war, seeking peace, not vengeance. "You'll face justice," he told the subdued lieutenant. Real justice in a courtroom with evidence and witnesses. Federal agents arrived minutes later, having been alerted by Agent Chen when the operation began. As they took custody of Pierce and the other officers, Marcus emerged, with his hands raised, the consummate professional even in victory. The community members who had witnessed the encounter broke into spontaneous applause. The man they had watched being systematically targeted and vilified had responded with tactical brilliance and moral restraint. The corrupt system had been exposed not through matching its violence, but by strategically revealing its darkness to the light of public scrutiny. The federal investigation expanded rapidly following Lieutenant Pierce's arrest. Agent Chen led a task force that uncovered corruption extending beyond the police department into the mayor's office building inspection department and licensing bureau. Indictments were issued for Lieutenant Pierce officers Keller, Walsh, and Morris on multiple charges, including racketeering, civil rights violations, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. Officer Dunham received immunity in exchange for comprehensive testimony about the 3-year operation targeting black-owned businesses. For Marcus Wilson, the victory brought unexpected challenges. Though vindicated by evidence and federal findings, he faced the daunting task of rebuilding his business and his place in the community. Cornerstone Spirits had suffered over $100,000 in damage through multiple vandalism incidents. The inventory had been depleted, and the property itself required significant repairs. On the Monday morning following Pierce's arrest, Marcus arrived at the store to assess the damage and plan reconstruction. He was surprised to find over 30 community members already there, armed with tools, building materials, and determination. "We take care of our own, Mrs. the Tear," Jenkins told him, simply directing volunteers with surprising authority for someone her age. James Anderson had organized barbers and stylists from his shop to help with repairs. Letitia Reynolds coordinated food for the workers. The rebuilding of Cornerstone Spirits became a community project, symbolizing the larger reconstruction of trust and safety in the neighborhood. As physical repairs progressed, Marcus worked with Agent Chen to ensure the legal process moved forward without obstruction. The mayor's office is trying to characterize this as a few bad officers, Chen explained during a meeting in the partially restored back office. We're pushing back with the financial evidence. The money trail doesn't lie. Marcus nodded, reviewing documentation of offshore accounts and property holdings. What about the other businesses that were targeted? They deserve compensation. We're building that into the prosecution strategy, Chen confirmed. Civil forfeiture of all assets connected to the corrupt operation. The funds will be directed toward restoring damaged businesses and establishing a community development fund. The legal proceedings revealed the full scope of the corruption. Over 3 years, Lieutenant Pierce and his officers had extracted approximately $4 million from black-owned businesses across 3 districts. 8 businesses had been forced to close when owners couldn't meet escalating demands. The targeting had been explicitly racial. Documentation showed Pierce instructing officers to focus on businesses without political connections while avoiding establishments with friends downtown. Most damning were recorded conversations revealing the contempt with which they viewed the community they had sworn to protect. While the legal system processed the corruption cases, Marcus focused on rebuilding his place in the community. His military background, once carefully concealed, became publicly acknowledged as he established security training programs for local business owners. His store expanded its community outreach, providing employment opportunities for young people like Dion Williams, who had recovered from his injuries and returned to work with renewed purpose. 6 weeks after Pierce's arrest, the remaining corrupt officers accepted plea agreements rather than face trial, with the overwhelming evidence against them. Only Lieutenant Pierce maintained his innocence, counting on political connections to shield him from the most serious consequences. His confidence proved misplaced when 3 senior officials in the mayor's administration were indicted on related charges, eliminating his protection network. The federal prosecution team, led by attorneys specializing in civil rights violations, presented a comprehensive case built on financial records, electronic surveillance, witness testimony, and documentary evidence. The trial lasted 17 days. Lieutenant Pierce's defense attempted to portray the entire operation as legitimate community policing, with perhaps overzealous implementation by subordinates. This narrative collapsed when financial evidence revealed his personal enrichment through offshore accounts. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The sentencing hearing 3 weeks later filled the courtroom with business owners who had suffered under the corrupt system. Marcus testified about the systematic targeting he had witnessed and experienced, presenting impact statements from owners who had lost livelihoods and family legacies to the extortion scheme. The judge, a former civil rights attorney, delivered a powerful statement before announcing the sentence. The corruption exposed in this case strikes at the foundation of equal justice under law. When those entrusted with protecting communities instead prey upon them based on racial targeting, they betray the badge and everything it should represent. Lieutenant Pierce received 27 years in federal prison. The other officers received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years based on their level of involvement and cooperation with investigators. The most significant outcome, however, went beyond individual punishments. The case triggered a Department of Justice investigation into systematic discrimination in policing across the city. Reform measures included civilian oversight boards with actual authority body camera requirements, with penalties for deactivation and community involvement in police leadership selection. 1 month after the sentencing, Marcus received an unexpected request. Lieutenant Pierce wanted to meet with him at the Federal Detention Center. Against the advice of Agent Chen and his community supporters, Marcus agreed. The meeting took place in a monitored room with bulletproof glass between them. Pierce appeared significantly older than during his trial, the confident authority figure replaced by a man confronting decades of imprisonment. "Why did you want to see me?" Marcus asked directly. Pierce studied him for a long moment. "I want to understand something. You had me dead to rights that night. Could have eliminated the problem permanently. I would have in your position." Marcus considered his response carefully. "That's the difference between us. I didn't return from war to bring more violence home. I came back to build something. But you were willing to fight," Pierce pressed. "You dismantled my entire operation systematically." "There's a difference between fighting for justice and seeking vengeance," Marcus replied. "I learned that difference in combat zones where the line often blurs." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, touching on race power, accountability, and the corrupting influence of systems that enable abuse. Pierce never apologized directly, but his final question revealed a man beginning to confront his actions. "Do you think people can change even after decades of thinking one way?" Marcus stood to leave. "I've seen warlords become community leaders. Taliban fighters become advocates for girls' education. Change is always possible." He paused at the door. "But it starts with facing what you've done without excuses." As Marcus left the detention center, he reflected on the journey from ambushed business owner to community leader. The corruption had been exposed and punished, but the harder work of building lasting justice was just beginning. He had fought systematic racism, not by matching its violence, but by strategically revealing its operations to public scrutiny. The tactics came from his military training, but the motivation came from something deeper, a commitment to the community he had chosen as home after years of defending American ideals abroad. The real victory wasn't Pierce's imprisonment, but the transformation beginning in the neighborhood. Business owners operated without fear of predatory officers. New establishments opened with community support. Most importantly, a precedent had been established that corruption would be exposed and accountability would follow regardless of who wielded the badge or office. As Marcus drove back to Cornerstone Spirits, he passed James Anderson's barbershop, now expanded into the vacant space next door. Letitia's bakery had lines out the door. New businesses were opening monthly, creating a revitalized commercial district where community wealth remained within the community. The cycle of intimidation had been broken, allowing prosperity to take root. The final confrontation hadn't been won with weapons, but with evidence, community solidarity, and strategic application of justice. For a man trained in warfare, Marcus Wilson had discovered that building peace required even greater strength and discipline than waging war. The federal investigation into police corruption expanded far beyond Lieutenant Pierce's immediate operation. Under Agent Chen's leadership, the task force examined cases dating back 7 years, identifying systematic patterns of discriminatory enforcement and extortion. The findings triggered one of the most comprehensive police reform initiatives in the city's history. Mayor Richard Collins, implicated through financial connections to Pierce, resigned rather than face impeachment. 3 city council members followed suit when evidence linked them to protecting the corrupt system. Formal indictments extended to the Building Inspection Department, Health Code Enforcement Office, and Licensing Bureau, all of which had participated in targeting black-owned businesses. For Marcus Wilson, vindication came with responsibility. As the most visible figure in exposing the corruption, he found himself thrust into a community leadership role he hadn't sought but couldn't refuse. The rebuilding of Cornerstone Spirits became a symbol of community resilience. Local contractors donated materials and labor. Neighboring businesses contributed inventory to replace what had been destroyed. When the store reopened 67 days after Pierce's arrest, over 300 community members gathered for a celebration that felt more like a victory rally. "This isn't just about one store," Marcus told the assembled crowd from improvised steps at the entrance. "This is about our right to build businesses, create prosperity, and expect equal protection under the law regardless of race." The federal court handling the corruption cases ordered comprehensive compensation for victimized businesses. Properties and assets seized from the corrupt network were liquidated, creating a restitution fund exceeding $6 million. James Anderson received $200,000 to expand his barber shop. Letitia Reynolds used her compensation to open a second bakery location. Most significantly, businesses that had been forced to close received funding to re-establish operations if owners chose to return. Beyond financial compensation, the case established precedent for institutional reform. The city implemented a civilian oversight board with actual authority to investigate police misconduct. Body camera requirements became strictly enforced with penalties for deactivation during public interactions. Most importantly, community members gained representation in police leadership selection and policy development. Marcus found his expertise increasingly in demand. The state legislature invited him to testify about systematic racism in law enforcement using his unique perspective as both a decorated military veteran and a targeted business owner. His testimony helped shape legislation requiring independent investigation of all civil rights complaints against police departments. Building on this momentum, Marcus established the Wilson Foundation for Business Equity, using his military pension and a portion of his compensation settlement as seed funding. The foundation provided capital mentorship and legal support for minority entrepreneurs facing discrimination. The organization quickly expanded beyond Chicago, establishing chapters in cities facing similar challenges. Officer Dunham's testimony proved crucial in securing convictions against the entire corrupt network. After completing his cooperation agreement, he approached Marcus about joining the foundation's work. "I became a police officer to help communities not prey on them," he explained during their meeting. "I want to be part of building something better." Marcus recognized the sincerity in the young man's redemption efforts and brought him into the organization as a liaison between law enforcement and community businesses. As reforms took root, Marcus maintained perspective about the challenges ahead. During a community forum at Greater Hope Baptist Church, a young activist expressed frustration about the slow pace of change despite the high-profile convictions. "We exposed one corrupt unit," Marcus acknowledged. "But systematic racism wasn't created by a few bad officers, and it won't be dismantled by removing them. This is generational work." His approach balanced accountability with forward progress. Rather than focusing exclusively on punishing past wrongs, Marcus emphasized creating systems that prevented future abuses. The Wilson Foundation established security cooperative programs where businesses shared surveillance systems and monitored police interactions throughout commercial districts. Lieutenant Pierce began serving his 27-year sentence at a federal facility in Colorado. 6 months into his incarceration, he contacted Marcus again, requesting another meeting. Marcus traveled to the prison curious about Pierce's evolution since their last conversation. The former lieutenant appeared diminished in his prison uniform, the arrogance replaced by something resembling reflection. "I've been reading about redlining practices from the 1942nd, Pierce said without preamble. "Studying how banking regulations systematically prevented black families from building wealth." He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "I never saw myself as racist, just practical, following patterns. But I'm beginning to understand the history that created those patterns." Marcus nodded, recognizing the beginning of a difficult journey toward understanding. Their conversation wasn't about forgiveness, but about accountability and the possibility of change, even for those who had participated in systematic oppression. The most profound transformation occurred in the neighborhood itself. With predatory enforcement removed, businesses flourished. Property values increased without displacing long-term residents. The commercial district expanded as entrepreneurs who had avoided the area due to corruption now sought locations in the revitalized community. Marcus expanded Cornerstone Spirits to include a community meeting space where police and residents could build relationships based on mutual respect rather than intimidation. He established a mentorship program pairing military veterans with at-risk youth, providing structure and purpose that transcended the street-level recruitment of gangs. Officer Keller, serving 15 years for his role in the corruption, requested a meeting with Dion Williams, the young employee he had ordered beaten. The conversation, facilitated by restorative justice practitioners, became a powerful moment of accountability as Keller faced the human impact of his actions without excuses or justifications. 1 year after the arrests, the community gathered for a commemoration event. The street outside Cornerstone Spirits had been renamed Justice Way through community petition. Business owners who had once operated in fear now displayed pride in their establishments and confidence in their rights. Marcus stood at the podium looking out at faces that had transformed from victims to partners in reform. Behind him hung 2 photographs his Delta Force team in Afghanistan and the Business Owners Association formed after the corruption exposure. "The hardest battle I fought wasn't overseas," he told the assembled crowd. "It was here in our own community against systems designed to prevent our success based on race." He gestured to the thriving commercial district around them. But unlike military victories that often create power vacuums filled by new oppressors, this victory belongs to all of us. We didn't just remove corruption, we're building something better in its place. The applause that followed represented more than appreciation for one man's courage. It celebrated a community that had transformed victimization into empowerment, fear into solidarity, and injustice into the foundation for lasting change. Marcus Wilson had returned from war seeking peace. He had found instead another battlefield, where his specialized skills proved unexpectedly valuable. The difference was that this victory created genuine security rather than temporary stability enforced through fear. As he looked at the transformed neighborhood, Marcus recognized that his most meaningful service hadn't been overseas defending American ideals, but at home making those ideals real for a community that had been denied their promise. The corruption had been exposed, but the real justice was being served daily through businesses operating without fear, community members walking streets with confidence, and systems being rebuilt with equity at their foundation. What do you think about Marcus's journey from military operator to community defender? Has this story changed how you view the relationship between communities and those who enforce the law? If you believe systematic change requires both exposing corruption and building better systems, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of everyday heroes standing against injustice. Share this video if you know someone who needs to hear that one person with courage and strategy can truly make a difference. Thank you for watching, and remember that justice isn't just served in courtrooms, it's built in communities where people refuse to accept anything less than equality. Marcus Wilson's story teaches us that systemic injustice requires strategic resistance. His military training gave him the skills to fight corruption, but it was his moral compass that guided how he used those skills. He chose justice over vengeance, even when facing those who had wronged him. The corrupt system assumed black business owners would be easy targets, but they underestimated both Marcus's capabilities and the community's resilience when united. True change required more than removing corrupt individuals, it demanded rebuilding systems with accountability and equity at their foundation. Marcus showed that exposing darkness works best when paired with creating light through community investment, mentorship, and economic opportunity. Perhaps most importantly, he demonstrated that fighting racial discrimination effectively means documenting everything, building alliances, and using the truth as your most powerful weapon. When institutions fail to protect all citizens equally, the responsibility falls to individuals with courage to stand up, speak out, and strategically dismantle the machinery of oppression, not through matching violence, but through revealing truth and building something better in its place. What injustice in your community would you stand against if you had Marcus's courage and strategic mind? Comment below with what you think is the most powerful tool in fighting discrimination, documentation, community solidarity, or legal action. If you believe one person with determination can create meaningful change against corrupt systems, hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of everyday heroes fighting against injustice, and share this video with someone who needs inspiration to stand up for what's right. Thank you for watching, and remember that in the face of racism and corruption, your voice and actions matter more than you know.